Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel and Mirz Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Nun Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos, and we pick up today on the very bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch of Mem Tes Amid Beis with a brand new Siman, Siman Ayin Reish Vav. Numerically, it would be Reish Ayin Vav, as we've spoken out many times before. They don't like writing Reish Ayin Vav because it has a bad connotation. Reish Ayin Vav would spell Ra'av, which would be a hunger, so we don't want to write Rav. Instead, we write Ayin Reish Vav. La'olam, a person is always supposed to use a Lashon Nikia. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasunim B'Tzara B'Shivya Ha'imdim Bein B'Yom U'Bein B'Yabasha Hamakom Yerachem Aleim V'Yitziim Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'efel L'Oiro Mishibud L'Geula Hashta B'Golav Zman Kariv V'Nemar Amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Tzvi ben Leah Miriam, who I believe is undergoing yet another surgery today. The Rebbeinu Shalom should protect him and grant him a refuah shalema. Should also give his parents and his family the necessary kayach to be able to take care of them. Okay, so we begin a new siman here. Al eze yayin mikachim, on what type of wine should we make kiddush? Ubay yud seifim, and here we have 10 seifim. Now there's a general rule. It's a general rule, 30,000 feet. There's lots of details to this rule, maybe some exceptions to the rule, but there is a general rule. And that is, we know that yayin, wine, was used on the Mizbeach in the form of the Nisachim. I'm recording this share on Chalamoid Sukkis. I'm in my sukkah, and we laned this morning the Musafim of the Yom Tov of Sukkis, and one of the psukim that you hear all the time is Umin chasam v'niskeihem laparim loilim v'lakivasim b'misparam kamishpat. Each carbon came together with a mincha. The mincha was an offering that was made up out of flour, oil, etc. And also nisachim. The nisachim were wine libations that were poured onto the mizbeach. The general rule when it comes to kiddush is any yayin that was kosher for nisachim on the mizbeach, even if it was only kosher b'diavad, even if it's not lechatchila to use that kind of wine on the mizbeach, but so long as it would be kosher b'diavad for nesachim on the mizbeach, that type of wine is kosher l'kiddush. Wine that's not kosher for nesachim on the mizbeach is not kosher v'kiddush. That's the general rule. We're going to have to see the details. Says the Mechaber, bottom line, Mem Tes Amid Beis Sif Aleph. Ein mekachin al yayin shereichoi ra. You cannot make kiddush on wine that has a bad odor. Afal gav dereiche v'tamei chamra. Says the Mechaber, this is true even if it has the smell of wine and it indeed has the tastes of wine, but somehow it is reichoi ra. The smell has turned and it's not a pleasant smell. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph, ein mekachin. First, says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true, even if you have no other wine to use. If you have this wine that's reichai ra, you do not use it for kiddush. It's not acceptable for kiddush. And says the Mishnah Berurah, if you used wine that was reichai ra b'diavad, it's mashma from the Ramban that's brought in the Beis Yosef, the la yotza, that even b'diavad, you're not yotza with such wine. V'ayin b'biur halacha, you can take a look at the biur halacha over here. Dibur hamaschal ein mekachin, where the Chavetz Chaim discusses this in greater detail and discusses whether or not this is a machlokes the Ramban and the Ritva. I believe he leans towards saying that it is not a machlokes the Ramban and the Ritva, that even the Ritva, who's more mekel, would also hold that yayin that's reichai ra is not acceptable for kiddush even b'diavad. V'im mutar lahavdal ala yayin kazeh. And as far as the question of whether or not this yayin that's a reichai ra, would it be acceptable for havdalah? Ayin b'chedusha Rabbi Akiva shemistapik bazeh. In the chedusha Rabbi Akiva Eger, Rabbi Akiva expresses a question. He expresses a suffix whether or not such wine would be acceptable. But says the Chavetz Chaim, v'li nira pashut hadavar le'iser. Chavetz Chaim says that to him it's a davar pashut, that this yayin that's a reichai ra would be not acceptable for havdalah either. Because over here, why is it that this yayin that's a reichai ra, why is it not acceptable for Kiddush. The truth is that this wine is a bona fide Bari Pri Agofen. Like the Mechaber said, we're talking about wine here that is Reiche Chamra. It smells like wine. It's Tameh Chamra. It tastes like wine. So this wine is a Bari Pri Agofen. So really, why is this wine not acceptable for Kiddush? The answer is it's based on a pasuk in Malachi. The pasuk says, "Hakriveu no lefecha secha." The Rebbeinu Shalom says about somebody who brings a behema to the mizbeach. Somebody's bringing a carbon, and he takes an animal that's a balmum. He takes an animal that's blemished in some way, and he brings that for a carbon. So the Rebbeinu Shalom says, "Am I going to accept such a carbon? Hakriveu no lefecha secha? Would you bring such a gift to your pechos? A pechos is a governor. It's some kind of a municipal officer, a government officer. But it's not a king. It's even a lower officer than a king. The Navi gives teichacha to Klal Yisrael and says, that's the carbon that you bring? Hakriveu no lefecha. If you had to bring a matana to the governor, is this the matana that you would bring? So is this going to find favor in the eyes of the Rebbeinu Shalom? So over here, this wine has a psul. It's not puzzle because it's not wine. It's puzzle because it's a bizayon to use such wine for a mitzvah, to use it for Kiddush. Hakriveu no lefecha secha. You're going to bring malodorous wine to use it for the mitzvah of Kiddush. That's why it's not acceptable. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, to him, while Rabbi Kiva Eger expresses a question whether or not this would be kosher for Havdalah, the Chavetz Chaim says to him it's a davar pashut that it's not acceptable for Havdalah, because the same concept, the same problem of hakriveu no lefecha secha that applies to Kiddush certainly applies to Havdalah as well. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, achakach matzasi b'Birkei Yosef. He says, later on I found in the Sefer Birkei Yosef shekasav kain b'shem Sefer Beis Yehuda, who says the same thing in the name of the Sefer Beis Yehuda. Upashut, and the Chavetz Chaim continues, and he says it's also obvious to hu adin ala shecher shereicha ra ein mekachin. This is not a halacha that's unique to wine. If somehow you have beer that is also malodorous, it has an unpleasant odor, so you can't use that for Kiddush or Havdalah either. It's the same problem of hakriveu no lefecha secha. Now, one thing that we haven't explained yet is what's pshat in this yayin that's reicha ra. What happened to this wine? What does it mean that it's tameh chamra? It tastes like wine. It's reicha chamra. It smells like wine, but it's reicha ra. It has an unpleasant odor. What exactly is wrong with this wine? Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and base, shereicha ra, hainu shemasriach ktsas. It got a little bit of an unpleasant odor. Makma shemunach bekli mo'us. It was put and stored into a keli that was mos. It was put into a repulsive keli. Maybe it was stored in an unclean keli or smelly keli, and that imparted an unpleasant odor to the wine. That's why the wine itself is reiche chamra. It still smells like wine. It's tameh chamra. It certainly still tastes like wine, but it's reichai ra. It was kailit. It absorbed a foul odor from the keli that it was kept in. And continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, "V'aftem avarkan olav bari pri agofen." Even though, like we spoke out, this wine is going to certainly necessitate the bracha of Bari Pri Agofen, it's bona fide wine. It's still also to make Kiddush on it, mishum hakriveu no lefecha secha, because of this problem of impropriety, that this is not something that's roy to use for a mitzvah, the same way you wouldn't give it as a gift to a governor or to a government official. Continues the Mechaber, the last three words on Mem Tes Amud Beis. V'lo yal yayin meguleh. You also cannot make Kiddush on wine that was left uncovered. Now that's something that we're going to have to quantify. Says the Mechaber, you can't use wine that was left uncovered. Afilu ha'idna, even nowadays, the loy kapdina nagilui, where nowadays there was a time when there was a gzera, there was a decree that was passed by the Chachamim that you're not allowed to drink liquids that were left uncovered for a certain amount of time. Certainly you weren't allowed to use such wine on the Mizbeach. What was the problem? The problem was there was a fear back in the day and in different locations, there were poisonous snakes around. They weren't so uncommon. And therefore there was always a chash, maybe a snake came and a snake drank from that wine or that liquid and imparted venom into the liquid, and now there's actually poisonous snake venom inside the wine or inside the liquid. Says the Mechaber, you're not allowed to use yayin megula. You're not allowed to use wine that was left uncovered for kiddush. Afilu ha'idna, even nowadays, the loy kaptinan agilui. We are no longer makpid on this gezerah against using liquids that were left uncovered. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah to get a little bit more of the backstory. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Nun Amid Aleph, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Gimel. This is true even nowadays, the loy kaptinan agilui. How come we're not makpid on this gezerah of mashkim that were left begoloi, uncovered? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Mishum she'ein mitzuyin etzleinu nechashim. Because Baruch Hashem, in most of the places that we live, it's not motzui by us, it's not very common to have poisonous snakes. And therefore we're not worried about snakes that left venom inside a drink. But, okay, so if we're not makpid on giloi, because we don't have these snakes, so what's wrong with making kiddush on yayin megula? Why does the Mechaber say, even though we're not makpid on yayin megula, we still can't use it for kiddush? Why not? Says the Chavetz Chaim, afilu hachi aser, it's still aser to use yayin megula, mishum hakriveu na lefecha secha. Again, it's the same problem. Somehow, wine that was left uncovered was no longer considered gishmaka wine. Wine that was left uncovered was considered, second rate. This wine was left uncovered. That's not. Would you give, if you wanted to give a bottle to the congressman, is that the bottle that you would give? You would give an uncovered bottle? No, you get a beautiful bottle with a nice fresh cork in it and everything else. That's what you give. You don't give wine that sat around uncovered. So again, this is a problem of hakriveu na lefecha secha. Now, okay, so what do we see over here? So far, we have two concepts. One is, there was a gzera against mashkim megulim. There was a gzera against drinking liquids that were left uncovered. Says the Mechaber, we're not makpid on that anymore. Having said that, even though we're no longer makpid on mashkim megulim, you can't use yayin megula for kiddush, and the Mishnah Berurah just explained why. So the first question that needs explanation is, if there was a gzeres chachamim against drinking mashkim that were left in megula uncovered, so why is it taka that we're no longer makpid on it? Now, what do you mean? The Mishnah Berurah just said we're not makpid on it because we don't have snakes. Yeah, but the general rule of a gzera that was made by Chazal is, even if the tam for the gzera is bottle, the gzera is not bottle. We don't look at gzeres chachamim and say, oh, that's not negeya anymore. The reason for that gzera is no longer applicable, therefore we don't have to be makbid on that din derabanan. That's not true. I'll tell you in Yonah D'Yoma, in Chutz La'aretz, we keep 2 days Yom Tov. We have Yom Tov Sheni Shal Golius. Why do we have Yom Tov Sheni Shal Golius? Oh, we have Yom Tov Sheni Shal Golius because it's Sveika D'Yoma, because they weren't really sure which day was Yom Tov. Yeah, but the Gemara says that nowadays we are B'kiyim B'kviya D'Yarcha. Nowadays we have a calendar. We know the true calendar. We know when Rosh Chodesh was. So I don't get it. We know when Rosh Chodesh Tishrei was. So we know when Yom Kippur was on the 10th day of Tishrei. And we also know when Sukkot is. We know when the 5th day. Go open up your calendar, Rabbi Isai. You're going to see that the first day of Sukkot was the 15th day of Tishrei, and the second day, Yom Tov, here in Chutz La'aretz, was the 16th day of Tishrei. There is no Yom Tov on the 16th day of Tishrei. The 16th day of Tishrei is the first day Chalamoid Sukkot. It's not Yom Tov. So why is it that in Chutz La'aretz we keep 2 days? People will respond right away and they'll say Sveika D'Yoma, but a Daf Yomi Yid is not going to say Sveika D'Yoma. A Daf Yomi Yid or a Dirshu Yid knows that the truth is we don't really have a Sveika D'Yoma. We know that the first day is Yom Tov and the second day is Chayil. So why do we keep second day Yom Tov Chutz La'aretz? Minig Aviseinu B'Yodeinu. Because there was Gzeres Chachamim on 2 days Yom Tov. So we keep 2 days Yom Tov. Doesn't matter that the tam is bottle. We keep 2 days Yom Tov anyway. So what are we saying over here? We're saying even though Chazal made a gzeira against drinking mashke begulim because of the problem of nechashim, and maybe the nachash left eres, he left venom in the drink, so you're not allowed to drink it. Oh, nowadays we don't have snakes. Nowadays you are allowed to drink it. Why is that? That doesn't work that way. The only way you could be Mavatal Gzeira, if it was a Davar Shebeminyan, it's something that a group of Chachamim were Geyser. Now it needs another minyan. It needs a new gathering of Chachamim to go ahead and be Mavatal it, and that never happened. So why is it that we're allowed to drink Mashke Begulim? So there are two famous terutzim that are given to this. One is by a Taisus and Avodah Zarah. Taisus and Avodah Zarah says, over here this is different. Because over here, the original Gezerah was only on places where there's a problem with nechashim. Taisus says that indeed, all the way at the beginning of this gzera, when there were places that didn't have nechashim, the gzera didn't apply to them. So the gzera was originally made in such a way that it was only applicable in places where they had the problem. But in places where they didn't have the problem, the gzera never applied. So if the time of the gzera doesn't apply where we live, there is no such gzera. That's a very simple teretz, and that's the teretz that's given by Taisus and Avodah Zarah. There's another famous teretz, which I believe is a Pischei Tshuva, and that is what the Pischei Tshuva, I believe it's the Pischei Tshuva, wants to say is that there are different types of gzeras chachamim. There's one type of gzera that we're all very familiar with, which when most people stop you in the street and they ask you, what's pshat in the din d'Rabbanan? Your answer is going to be the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says, asu syag la Torah. You have to make a fence. You have to make a protection for the Torah. What does that mean? We need isurei d'Rabbanan to make sure that somebody is not going to come to be over an Issa Daraisa. Very, very simple case in point. What we colloquially call carrying on Shabbos. What's the Issa Daraisa of Hoitzah on Shabbos? The Issa Daraisa of Hoitzah on Shabbos, there are really two Isurim. One Isur is to take an object, make an Akira, pick it up in one type of Rishus, transfer it to another type of Rishus, and make a Hanocha. So an Issa Daraisa of Hoitzah would be, if you pick up an item in a bona fide Rishus HaYachid, you pick up an item in your house is a bona fide Rishus HaYachid, a private domain, you take it outside to a real Rishus Harabim, a real public domain. What does that mean? Oh, it's 16 amas wide. You got 600,000 people going and using this street. It's a real bona fide Rishus Harabim. And you put it down in Rishus Harabim. So you made an Akira in Rishus HaYachid. You made a Hanach in Rishus Harabim. You're over and it's a Daraisa of Hoitzah. Or the opposite. You pick up something in a real Rishus Harabim. You put it down in a real Rishus HaYachid. That's also, you went ahead and you were over on Anissa Daraisa of Hoitzah. Or you're in a real Rishus Harabim, you pick something up, you carry it for 4 amas, and then you put it down. You were Maver Achefetz Dalet amas in Rishus Harabim. That's Anissa Daraisa. But then we have all sorts of Isurei D'Rabbanan when it comes to Hoitzah. For example, what if you have an area that's not a real Rishus Harabim? You have an area that's not 16, it's not a street that's 16 amas wide. According to many poskim, it's not an area that's traversed by 600,000 people. So, case in point, you have a park, you have an open field. That's not a Rishus Harabim Daraisa. Are you allowed to carry a chayfetz, dalet amas, inside that area? No, it's a Carmelis. That's a Carmelis is a Rishus D'Rabbanan. Picking up something, moving it 4 amas and putting it down would be an Issa D'Rabbanan in a Carmelis, not an Issa Daraisa. Why is it Usr? It's Usr because if we allow somebody to be Maver Achefetz, Dalet amas in a Rishus D'Rabbanan of a Carmelis, he might come to be Maver Achefetz, Dalet amas in a real Rishus Harabim. So we made an Issa D'Rabbanan to protect against you being over an Issa Daraisa. Another classic. You have a chutzner, so you have a bungalow colony. You have a common chutzner, a common yard, and you have a bunch of individual bungalows owned by a bunch of different people opening up onto the chutzner. Now, the bungalow is a Rishus HaYachid. The truth is that the chutzner is also a Rishus HaYachid, especially if there's a fence around the colony, so the chutzner is a Rishus HaYachid. Are you allowed to take your Mishnah Berurah, pick it up inside the bungalow, and put it down on a table inside the chutzner of the bungalow colony? No, you're not. It's an Issa D'Rabbanan. You moved a chayfetz from the bungalow to the chutzner. But what do you mean? There's an Erev. Yeah, if it's surrounded by a fence and you made an Eruvei Chatzeros, then you're allowed to transfer the Mishnah Berurah from the bungalow to the chutzner. But absent an Eruvei Chatzeros, you're not allowed to do it. Why? I don't understand. What's the problem? You picked up a Mishnah Berurah in the bungalow. The bungalow is a Rishus HaYachid. You put it down on a table in the Chotzer. If the bungalow colony is surrounded by a fence, the Chotzer is also Rishus HaYachid. What did you do wrong? The answer is you're an over in Issa D'Rabbanan. What's the Issa D'Rabbanan over here? The bungalow looks like a private house. It is a private house. That's a real Rishus HaYachid. The Chotzer, which halachically is also a Rishus HaYachid, but it doesn't feel like a Rishus HaYachid. The Chotzer feels like a Rishus HaRabim. Why? Because the Chotzer is serving all of the different owners of all of the different bungalows. So it's public. It's not private. So it feels like a Rishus HaRabim. So Chachamim were geyser. You're not allowed to take the Mishnah Berurah from the bungalow and put it down in the Chotzer, or vice versa, because if we allow you to do that, you might come to transfer an item from a real Rishus HaYachid to a real Rishus HaRabim. And you might be over on a daraisa. So that's the most common kind of Gzeres Chazal. It's Vasus Yag LaTorah. It's a Gzera that Chazal made in Issa D'Rabbanan to protect against you being over in Issa Daraisa. But that's not this Gzeres Chachamim. This Gzeres Chachamim of Mashkim Gluyim, that you can't drink from liquids that were left uncovered, that's not protecting against an Issa Daraisa. That's a Gzera because of a sakana. We're afraid that you might come to drink from liquid that a snake imparted venom into. So we want to protect your health. That's the Gzeres Chachamim. Says the Pischei Tshuva, that kind of Gzera is not true, that you need a new minion of Chachamim to come and mavatal the original Gzera. If the Chash Sakana is gone, if the concern of danger is no longer applicable, then you don't need the Gzera. Then the Gzera is bottled without a new minion. Okay, so that was the first thing that we have to explain over here in Mishnah Berurah Ois Gimel. The second thing that we're going to have to explain is, we're talking here about wine that's Megula, but the Mechaber doesn't tell me anything about how long the wine has to be uncovered. So you took a bottle of wine, you brought it to the table, you popped the cork, you left it out for 5 minutes. Is it now Yain Megula? It's no longer kosher for Kiddush? Well, how are we supposed to quantify this? And let's see the words of the Mishnah Berurah inside. The Mishnah Berurah says, so in my print, we're 4 lines down in the Mishnah Berurah, right by the ice cut and dalid for the Sharet Zion. The Mechaber said that Yain Megula, wine that was left uncovered, is not kosher for Kiddush. Says the Chavetz Chaim Miu, Im Amad Shamu Etes Megula, if the wine was uncovered for a short period of time, ein lahakbid ha'idna. Nowadays, we don't have to be makbid on it, and we could still use it. Kol zman shalei namar tamei v'reichai, so long as the smell of the wine and the taste of the wine has not gone bad. But again, we're not quantifying over here. The Mechaber doesn't quantify to me how long is considered Yain Megula. And the Chavetz Chaim, who says that Shamuetis is okay, doesn't tell me how long Shamuetis is. So I don't have either direction. I don't know what a short time is called, and I don't have what a long time is called. So there is a footnote here in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. It is footnote number 4. That sheds a little light on it. I would have gone in a different direction, and I'll tell you where I would go, but let's read the footnote. The footnote says like this: V'loi pirish kama hu sher azman shel shamuetes. The Chavetz Chaim says a short amount of time left uncovered is okay, but he doesn't tell us how long a short amount of time is. The Kosev HaKtseis HaShulchan, the Sefer Ktseis HaShulchan writes, sheyesh lav yiraya mileil haseder. Okay? The Ktseis HaShulchan reaches out to Pesach, and he brings a raya. How long is uncovered? How long can you leave wine uncovered and it should still not be a problem? He brings a raya from Pesach. Shafilu gimeloi dalet choice, even 3 or 4 hours, nechshav b'chlal shamuetes, is considered a short amount of time, and that wine is still acceptable for Kiddush. What's his raya? Very interesting raya. Mikach shaharei miyad acharei kaisa rishayna. Right after we drink the first kais of the dalet kaises by the Pesach Seder, so that's the kais of Kiddush. What's the next thing that we do? Moizgim as a kais hashniya. We right away pour the second kais. Okay, now the second kais is sitting in an uncovered kais on the table, and it's going to remain uncovered until when? Until we drink the second kais. When do we drink the second kais? After Magid. How long does Magid take? Oh, in a lot of households, Magid takes 3 or 4 hours. We go through Magid. Hours and hours, we go through Magid. So obviously, that wine is still kosher. Otherwise, we couldn't use it for the second kais. So you see that wine uncovered for several hours is not a problem. So the Ksais HaShulchan brings a raya. Oh, you see that yayin megula for several hours is not a problem. V'das going Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zechet Tzadik Levracha she'ein lo havi raya misham. But Rav Shlomo Zalman says you can't bring a raya from there. Mishum shebelela seder tzarich loimer es ha'agada ala kais. That's part and parcel of the mitzvah of the Seder. L'chein ein zeh nechshav gilui. It's not called a kais megula over there because that's the requirement of the Seder. K'moishi misha marich ba'amiras hakiddush shama ruba. If somebody, you're telling me yayin megula is a problem, you can't use it for kiddush. So does that mean, is there a sif cotton in Shulchan Aruch that says you should not be marich in kiddush? You should make sure to say kiddush very quickly, so you shouldn't have a problem of yayin megula. No. So even if somebody is a chazan and he's going to go, I hear these people, because the same halacha you should know applies, we said, to Havdalah. So guy makes Havdalah, Hinei Kel Yeshuasi, and he goes on and on and on and on and on for Havdalah. So what? Problem? Yayin Megula. No, that's Havdalah. So you make Kiddush for a long time, you're a chazan, it takes you a long time to make Kiddush, that's Kiddush. It takes 3 or 4 hours by the Seder because of Magid, that's the Seder, says the Shlomo Zalman. So that's not going to make the Yain Megula. So the Shlomo Zalman doesn't like this raya. Okay, but the footnote over here doesn't tell me what Shlomo Zalman says. So what is considered a shamuetes? He doesn't say over here. So I go to my old standby, which is always the Aruch HaShulchan. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, the Aruch HaShulchan was a Rav, the Aruch HaShulchan was a Paisik. The Aruch HaShulchan quantified it for us. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, Ube'emes, Yena Shalanu Oimdais Bebakbukim Mechusim. We usually keep our wine on the table in covered bottles. We keep it in the refrigerator in a bottle with a cork in it. V'im amet shamuetes megula ein kpeda. And if it sits there uncovered for a short amount of time, it's okay. And then he says, but, aval, kisha amad kol alayla megula. If it's uncovered overnight, ayafilu harbe shois, or many hours, ein mekachin alav, then you can't use it for kiddush, ve'ein mavdilan alav, and you can't use it for havdalah because of the problem of hakriveu na lefecha secha. So what we see from the Aruch HaShulchan is what's called a long time, what's called a problem of yain megula, overnight or many hours. To me, if somebody says overnight or many hours, I'm thinking that many hours is at least 6. That's the indication that I get. Anything less than that is shamuetes and is not a problem. Another thing that I would say is that it's very possible that even longer than that is not a problem for us. Why? Because let's remember, what's the whole problem here of yayin megula? Excuse me 1 second. What's the problem here of yayin megula? The problem over here of yayin megula is hakriveu nolafechasecha. It's considered inferior wine, and you wouldn't give it as a gift anymore because it's inferior wine. What makes it inferior wine? It's only inferior wine if the fact that it was uncovered somehow affects the quality of the wine. Let me tell you something. You could take a bottle of cream malaga and you could leave it in the refrigerator overnight and then take it out, and you're not going to see any difference between that cream malaga when you first opened it and that cream malaga now. So I'm not even sure that the kind of wines that we're usually dealing with, I'm not talking about, really high-end wine, $250 bottles, etc., etc. But the wines that are more common, the table wines that people use nowadays for Kiddush, I'm really not sure that this yayin megula is going to apply, even if it's taka left uncovered for many hours. Says the Mishnah Berurah. The Chayadam writes, the dafke b'makom shehayayin b'yoker, this kula, that we don't have to worry about yayin megula for a shamu etes, the Chayadam says that's only where yayin is very expensive. You know why they weren't makbid and yayin megula, says the Chayadam? Because wine was a very precious commodity and wine was very expensive. And remember all these halachas that we had. What do you do if you have a very limited quantity of wine? How should you parcel it out? Kiddush Friday night, Kiddush Shabbos day, Havdalah, etc., etc. So when wine was so precious and such a rare commodity, yes, they weren't makbid if the yayin was megula. Aval HaMekadesh ala shecher. But if somebody finds himself in a situation where he's making Kiddush on beer, which you could do because beer is Chamar Medina, beer was cheap. So over there, says the Chayadam, Zahir Bazeh, then you certainly should be makpid on Yayin Megula. Because when you're dealing with something that's cheap, then you should be makpid. Venira, and the Chavetz Chaim says, the Chavetz Chaim says, listen, if you have nothing else, if you have nothing else to make Kiddush on, you shouldn't be makpid on Megula, even by Sheikhar. Okay, now we go to the words of the Ramah, top line here, Nun Amid Aleph Hagah, says the Ramah. Ve'ein mekachin ala yayin dereiche chamra v'tamei chala. You cannot make Kiddush on wine that still has the smell of wine, that's reiche chamra, it smells like wine, but v'tamei chala, but it tastes like vinegar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cotton dollar v'tamei chala, the basa taima azlinon ukechala dami. By wine, the rule is we go after the taste. So if you smelled it and it's starting to smell a little vinegary, so far from what I could find out, the process of wine turning into vinegar has to do with oxidation. When the wine begins to oxidize, acetic acid builds up and it starts to turn into vinegar. Now that's going to have a sharp, vinegary smell. So the Ramah is talking over here about wine that does not smell like vinegar at all. It smells like wine, but it's v'tamei chala. But it's beginning to taste like vinegar. So it's got a zing to it. It's got a sting, that wine. We're not talking about wine. I was talking to various people about this today. Sometimes you take out a bottle of cream alaga, you take out a bottle of Concord grape, and you pour it into your kais, and it no longer has that purplish or reddish color. It's starting to turn, I call it this like brickish color. And it has a bit of an odor, it's a little bit off, and when you taste it, it tastes off, but that's not vinegar. That's not turning to vinegar. That's wine that's starting to go bad. It's poor quality, but it's still wine. And it's still a very priagofen. And b'diavad, it's still kosher for Kiddush. Is it lechatchila? No. Lechatchila, you should use good wine. We're going to see that later. So it's not lechatchila. But if you made Kiddush, you're going to be yoitza. Over here, the Ramah's talking about wine that has turned to vinegar. It's got that zing to it, and it's got that vinegary taste. But it still smells like wine. So the Kiddush of the Ramah is just telling you, remember that by wine, we go after taste. So if it tastes like vinegar, it is vinegar, even if it smells like wine, and therefore you cannot use it for Kiddush. Again, Mishnah Berurah is cutting daled v'tamei chalad b'asa taimos linon ukechalad. We go after taste, and if it tastes like vinegar, it is a din of vinegar. Ulakach l'kamon b'sif gimel, and we see the opposite later on in sif gimel b'tamei chamra. When you have wine that tastes like wine, mekachet alav, you can make Kiddush on it avagav dereicha chala, even though over there it smells like vinegar, but we go after taste. It tastes like wine. It's wine. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he tries to define for us a little bit more. What does this mean, tamei chala, that it tastes like vinegar? The tamei chala, what is that called? Nikra shekol shebnei adam nimnoim lishtoisai bishom chamitzusai. Tamei chala means a person will refrain from drinking it because it has that taste of chimutz, a taste of vinegar. You all know what that is, Rabbi Isai. You use vinegar in your salad dressings. You know what Italian dressing tastes like. You know what a vinaigrette tastes like. It's got the zing of vinegar. That's what this means. So again, it doesn't mean Concord grape that you taste it, you go, this wine is turning. It means it's got a zing. It's starting to turn to vinegar. That's when it's no good. The Achrayim right, the Lechinam hetek Ramah din zeh. There was really no reason for the Ramah to give us this halacha. The Gamboy Priagofen ein mevarchen olav k'di isa sham. The truth is, once you have yayin that's tamei chala, once you have yayin that tastes like vinegar, you can't even make a bari pragofen on it. Kolshke chain mekachin, certainly you cannot make Kiddush on it. Now we go to the Mechaber Sif Bey, second line down here on Nun Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber. Yayin migitoi, wine straight from the wine press. So this was grapes that were squeezed. You have grape juice, but it was not yet fermented. So this is fresh wine, straight out of the wine press. Yain migitoi, bekachet. You could use it for kiddush. And, says the Mechaber, I'll tell you even stronger. V'soichet adam eshkol shel anovim. Somebody could take a cluster of grapes, squeeze it out. Obviously, you can't squeeze it out on Shabbos. That would be an Issa Daraisa. But you could squeeze it right before Shabbos. You could squeeze out a cluster of grapes. V'omer lov kiddush hayoim. And then 15 minutes later, an hour later, you could use it for kiddush Friday night. Some mamish fresh grape juice. You just take grapes, you squeezed it, you got Concord grape juice. You could go use that for kiddush. I will have to see in the Mishnah Berurah what's the big kiddush of the second thing that the Mechaber told us here. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut. Yayin migitoi. He wines straight out of the press. Nevertheless, having said this halacha of the Mechaber, mitzvah min hamuvchar b'yayin yoshon. The mitzvah min hamuvchar is to use aged wine. V'aynu shekafar over alav arba'im yoim. That means wine that was left to age and ferment for at least 40 days. And again, this is taken from the halacha of the mizbeach. For nisachim on the mizbeach, you're supposed to use yayin yoshon. You're supposed to use wine. The truth is that the bracha of Boyer Priagofen was niskan al yayin for two reasons. Yayin is so'id, it satiates a person, and it's misameach. It gladdens a person. What does that mean? It has the ability to give somebody a buzz. It makes them happy. Grape juice doesn't do that. Yet, grape juice is a bari priagofen because since the nature of the grape juice is that it has the potential to ferment and get alcohol and be misameach. So already on fresh grape juice, you make a bari priagofen, and that's why you could use fresh grape juice for kiddush. B'di'eved, you could use yayin megitoi on the mizbeach for nesachim. Lechatchila, you can't. But b'di'eved, you can. Since it's kosher b'di'eved on the mizbeach, it's kosher for kiddush. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, it's not mitzvah min hamuvchar. Mitzvah min hamuvchar is to use yayin that could be misameach. That means yayin that was fermented for at least 40 days. Ois cotton vav. Then the Mechaber said, I'll one-up you. Not only could you use yayin megitoi, wine straight out of the wine press, you could mamish take a cluster of grapes, squeeze it out, and use it for kiddush. Of course, you can't squeeze it on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'seichet adam bazash me'ino revusa tvei." Over here, the Mechaber is actually telling me an additional chiddush. Av she'u chadash legamri. This is mamish fresh. Shezemi karov shesachtai kaidem Shabbos. You squeezed it out right before Shabbos. Afilu hachi mutar lekadish alav. So when the Mechaber said yayin migitoi, he meant grapes that were pressed for wine. So you pressed it in the wine press. But it didn't yet age 40 days. Maybe it aged a day. Maybe it aged 2 weeks. Maybe it aged 3 weeks. But it didn't yet age 40 days. In the second phrase of the Mechaber, he's telling you, no, even if it's a half hour after you squeeze the grapes, it's mamish, it's like the words of the Mishnah Berurah, Chodesh legamri. It's mamish fresh. It's still usable for kiddush. Says the Ramah 3 lines down. Haga. Oh, no, we're not up to that yet. Sif Gimel, second line down. Mekachet al yayin shebefi hachavis. You could use the wine that's mamish on the top of the barrel, afal pi sheyesh by kmochin, even though it has white flecks on it that look like flour. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Zayin. Kmochin, hainu nekudais lavanos. It has white flecks. So this is the wine right off the top of the wine barrel, and it's got some white flecks on it. I don't know what this is. I called 2 sommeliers today to find out. They didn't return my call. One of them actually sent me a WhatsApp and said, I'm not a Rav, I don't want to answer questions. I said, I just need to know the facts of wine. He won't answer me. Okay, fine, listen, okay. The other one hasn't called me back yet. If I get more information, I'll let you know. Right now, I'm just going with what the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah says. There's some kind of white flecks on the surface of the barrel. You could use that wine off the top of the barrel anyway. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, im yeshel of krum lavan, if there's a white skin on top of the barrel, ein mekachet alav, then you cannot use this for kiddush. What I have seen is that when the wine on the barrel forms like a white skin on top, that is the beginning of the process of acetic acid building up and the wine turning to vinegar. The Kasav El Yerabah, the Kesheser Akrom, and Lachmer. But the El Yerabah says if you take off that skin, you don't have to be machmer, and you could use the wine. Continues the Ramah, 3 lines down the middle of the line. Hago. V'yesh oisrin l'kadish alav. There are those that say that you cannot use this wine on the top of the barrel that has white flecks. Ella yisanenu tchila. You have to filter it first. Lahaver akmochin, to take out these white flecks. Says the Mechaber Viter, 2 lines off the bottom, beginning of the line. Val yayin shebeshulei achavis. You could use the wine at the bottom of the barrel. Alpha pishyesh by shmarim. Even though there's sediment built up at the bottom of the barrel, and now when you take out a kais of yayin, you're going to get sediment in the kais. You could use that for kiddush. Val yayin shachar. You could also use black wine. Val yayin masaik. You could use overly sweet wine. Val yayin dereiche chalav etame chamra. You could use wine that smells like vinegar, but it tastes like wine, because we said we go basar tama. Umikamaka mitzvah livrar yayin toiv lekadish alav. Nevertheless, having said that all of these seemingly inferior types of wine are kosher for kiddush, the mitzvah ben amuvchar certainly is to use high quality wine for kiddush. Zeh keli va'anveyu. You want to use good, delicious, high-quality wine to do the mitzvah of Kiddush. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Ches. The Ramah mentioned masaik, overly sweet wine. Midas asam, from the fact that the Ramah wrote this in a very... The Ramah? No, the Mechaber. Wrote this in a very general way. Yayin masaik, overly sweet wine. But he didn't explain what's pshat that it's overly sweet. Mashma, the implication is, bein shenispashlu ha'anavim b'chama yoser midai. Could be that it's overly sweet because the grapes stayed on the vine too long, and they baked in the sun too long, and they're overly ripe. So you made wine from overly ripe grapes. And that's why this wine is very sweet. Or it could be that this was a variety of grapes that were just overly sweet, and it was considered not chosh of a wine. And the Mishnah Berurah says such wine would be possible for nesachim. But the implication from the Mechaber is, it still would be kosher for Kiddush. Va'ayin bi'ar halacha, he sends you to the bi'ar halacha dibra maschil, va'al yayin masaik, which goes into the details. Remember, I told you, 30,000 feet, yayin that's possible for nesachim is possible for Kiddush. Yet over here, the implication of the Mechaber is that even wine that's overly sweet, because it's a variety of grapes that are overly sweet, and such wine would be possible for nesachim, the implication of the Mechaber is it would be kosher for Kiddush. Ice cut and test. Nevertheless, even though these inferior types of wine are kosher for Kiddush, still the mitzvah bin amavchar certainly is to use high quality wine. Hainu after mekacha the kalhani, even though you could use all of these, af lichatchila, they're not kosher b'diavad, they're kosher even lichatchila. In other words, the Kavetz Chaim is saying, don't walk away from this and say that, oh, yayin masaik is b'diavad, yayin shachar is b'diavad, yayin shebeshulei achavis is b'diavad. No, these are not b'diavad. They're even lechatchila, but it's not mitzvah min hamuvchar. Mitzvah min hamuvchar is to be bar yayin toiv. Baruch Hashem, nowadays, most people, I dare say, have the ability. And we have kosher wine stores on every, all over the place nowadays. So go in, buy a nice bottle of wine for Kiddush. Don't just grab any old bottle out of the wine cellar. Make sure that it's okay. Now, I don't want you to walk away from the wrong impression. Listen, if you're a man of means and you have the ability to do it, and you want to go to the wine store and you want to buy a $50 bottle for Kiddush, and it's within your means, and you're doing it to be mahader in the mitzvah of Kiddush, not because you want to show off that you have a $50 bottle and you really want to drink it together with the prime rib. If you're being mahader after the mitzvah of Kiddush, and l'chvay the mitzvah of Kiddush, you're buying a $50 bottle, and that's within your means, go ahead. But for regular people, I don't see that there's particularly a need to do that. What the Mishnah Berurah means when he says don't take just a bottle out of the wine cellar, he doesn't mean, oh, don't just grab a bottle of cream lager. That's not what he means. What he means is, in those days, a person went down to the wine cellar, and you don't know, this one might be starting to turn, this one might be a little bit off, this one maybe didn't age enough, this one that. They weren't controlled like what we have now. So says the Mishnah Berurah, Yivrar loy, the Mechaber says, Yivrar yayin toiv l'kadish alav. Go down to the wine cellar, pop the corks, pick out a bottle that smells good and nice. That's what you should use for Kiddush. We're going to stop over here. We'll pick up next time with Sif Daled. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua's and Refuah's Panas and Shadukim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yas Gal Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.